The morning of December 7th, 1941. Dawn clear and peaceful over the Hawaiian island of Oahu. Lieutenant Commander Samuel Fuqua stood on the deck of the USS Arizona, watching the sun paint the harbor waters gold as sailors prepared for another routine Sunday. The massive battleship swayed gently at her mooring, one of 8 battleships anchored in what the Navy called Battleship Row. Around him, the sounds of a naval base coming to life filled the air, the clatter of breakfast preparations, the distant call of gulls, and the low hum of conversation from sailors enjoying their day off. At Ford Island Naval Air Station, Aviation, Machinist's Mate Second Class John Finn was already at work, despite the early hour. The 32-year-old mechanic had developed a reputation for dedication that earned him respect throughout the base. He moved methodically between the rows of aircraft, checking fuel lines and inspecting engines on the consolidated PBY Catalina, flying boats that would soon patrol the vast Pacific. The base housed nearly 200 aircraft, from fighter planes to reconnaissance bombers, all lined up in neat rows that made maintenance easier but created perfect targets for any aerial assault. Captain Mervyn Benyon, commanding officer of the USS West Virginia, was reviewing reports in his cabin when he heard the first distant rumble of aircraft engines. The sound was unusual for a Sunday morning, when flight operations typically remained minimal. He set down his coffee and moved to the porthole, squinting into the brightening sky. Something felt different about this morning, though he couldn't yet identify what troubled him. Across the harbor, Seaman First Class James Ward was painting the hull of the USS Oklahoma when he noticed the approaching aircraft formations. The planes flew in perfect V-shaped patterns, their engines creating a growing thunder that echoed off the surrounding mountains. Ward paused in his work, paintbrush dripping, as he counted the incoming aircraft. There were far too many for any scheduled training exercise he knew about. At the same moment, Private First Class Joe Rasmussen was manning his post at the Army's Schofield Barracks, several miles inland from the harbor. The young soldier had been on guard duty since 4 in the morning, fighting to stay alert in the peaceful Hawaiian dawn. When he heard the approaching aircraft, he reached for his binoculars and focused on the formation streaming in from the north. Something about their silhouettes looked wrong. These weren't the familiar shapes of American aircraft he'd trained to recognize. The radio crackled to life in the harbor control tower, where Chief Petty Officer Harry Rasmussen was monitoring routine morning traffic. Normal Sunday communications consisted mainly of weather reports and scheduling updates, but today brought an unusual transmission from a patrol plane that had departed earlier for routine reconnaissance. The pilot's voice carried an edge of confusion as he reported unidentified aircraft approaching from the northwest, flying in military formation at high altitude. According to historical records maintained by the National Archives, the first wave of Japanese aircraft had launched from 6 aircraft carriers, positioned approximately 200 miles north of Oahu. The attacking force consisted of 183 aircraft, including fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo planes, all converging on the unsuspecting naval base with devastating precision. As the clock tower at Pearl Harbor chimed 7:30 in the morning, the peaceful Sunday routine was about to shatter forever. The men and women stationed at this remote Pacific outpost had no way of knowing that they stood at the precipice of history, that the next few hours would transform their quiet naval base into the epicenter of America's entry into the Second World War. The approaching aircraft carried more than bombs and bullets. They carried the weight of destiny, ready to awaken a sleeping giant and thrust the United States into a conflict that would reshape the entire world. At precisely 7:48 in the morning, the illusion of peace shattered like glass against concrete. Commander Mitsuo Fukuda, leading the first wave of Japanese aircraft, gave the signal that would echo through history. The attack began with a coordinated precision that caught the American forces completely off guard, transforming the tranquil Sunday morning into a nightmare of smoke, fire, and death. The first bombs fell on Ford Island, where aviation machinists Mate John Finn was still working among the parked aircraft. The explosion threw him to the ground, his ears ringing as debris rained down around him. Through the smoke and confusion, He saw the rising sun emblems on the wings of the attacking aircraft, the unmistakable mark of the Japanese Navy. Without hesitation, Finn sprinted toward the armory, determined to mount some form of defense even as enemy bullets strafed the ground around his feet. Lieutenant Commander Samuel Fuqua felt the USS Arizona shudder beneath him as the first torpedo struck. Her hull, the massive battleship, displacing over 30,000 tons, groaned like a wounded beast as seawater began flooding her compartments. Around him, sailors ran in all directions, some toward battle stations, others simply trying to escape the growing chaos. The ship's public address system crackled to life with urgent commands, but the words were nearly drowned out by the thunder of explosions and the scream of diving aircraft. Captain Mervyn Benyon was climbing to the bridge of the USS West Virginia when a fragment from an armor-piercing bomb tore through his abdomen. Despite his mortal wound, he refused to abandon his post, continuing to issue orders as his ship listed heavily to port. Blood soaked through his uniform, but his voice remained steady as he directed damage control efforts and coordinated with other ships in the harbor. His executive officer, Commander Roscoe Hillencoter, stayed by his side, relaying orders as their ship slowly settled into the harbor mud. The USS Oklahoma, moored next to the West Virginia, took the brunt of the torpedo attack. Seaman James Ward, who had been painting the hull moments before, found himself trapped below decks as the ship began to roll over. The Oklahoma took 5 torpedo hits in rapid succession, each one tearing massive holes in her port side. Water rushed in with terrifying speed, and Ward joined dozens of other sailors in a desperate race against time, crawling through flooded compartments and climbing through hatches that were rapidly becoming horizontal as the ship capsized. Private Joe Rasmussen at Schofield Barracks heard the explosions rolling across the island like thunder. Through his binoculars, he watched columns of black smoke rising from Pearl Harbor, punctuated by the orange flash of secondary explosions. Japanese fighters swept low over the Army base, their machine guns raking the barracks and motor pool. Rasmussen dove for cover behind a concrete barrier, his training taking over as he began returning fire with his rifle, knowing that his small-caliber bullets had little chance against the armored aircraft, but determined to fight back nonetheless. The USS Arizona, pride of the Pacific Fleet, became the symbol of the attack's devastation when a modified 16-inch, armor-piercing shell dropped from a high-altitude bomber penetrated her forward magazine. The explosion lifted the massive battleship partially out of the water, her forward section disintegrating in a fireball that could be seen for miles. Over 1,000 men died in that single, catastrophic moment, including Lieutenant Commander Fuqua, who was swept away by the blast even as he tried to organize firefighting efforts. Chief Petty Officer Harry Rasmussen in the control tower watched in horror as the harbor transformed into a vision of hell. Ships burned and listed, aircraft exploded on their parking areas, and the calm waters of Pearl Harbor became choked with oil, debris, and the bodies of American servicemen. His radio crackled with desperate calls for help, reports of damage, and requests for medical assistance that far exceeded the base's capacity to respond. Historical accounts from the Pearl Harbor National Memorial indicate that the first wave of the attack lasted approximately 15 minutes, during which Japanese aircraft delivered devastating blows to the American Pacific Fleet. The attackers achieved complete tactical surprise, facing minimal anti-aircraft fire during the crucial opening moments when their bombs and torpedoes found their marks with deadly accuracy. As the first wave of Japanese aircraft wheeled away from the harbor, leaving destruction in their wake, the American survivors had only moments to catch their breath before the second wave arrived. The attack was far from over, and the men and women of Pearl Harbor would need to summon reserves of courage they never knew they possessed to face what was coming next. As the first wave of Japanese aircraft departed, leaving Pearl Harbor shrouded in smoke and flame, extraordinary acts of heroism began to emerge from the chaos. The second wave of attackers was already approaching, but the Americans were no longer caught completely off guard. Though bloodied and stunned, they began to fight back with a determination that would become legendary. Aviation machinist's mate John Finn had managed to reach a .50 caliber machine gun. Despite the strafing runs that had torn through Ford Island, setting up the weapon in an exposed position, he began firing at the attacking aircraft with methodical precision. Bullets struck the ground around him, fragments tore through his clothing, and shrapnel peppered his body, but Finn never left his post. For over 2 hours, he maintained his position, shooting down multiple enemy aircraft while blood streamed from more than 20 wounds. His sustained fire provided crucial cover for other sailors attempting to reach defensive positions. On the USS West Virginia, Ensign Victor Delano had taken command of the ship's anti-aircraft batteries after Captain Benyon's mortal wounding. The young officer, barely 22 years old, coordinated the battleship's defensive fire even as she continued to settle into the harbor bottom. Water lapped at the main deck, and the ship's list grew more pronounced with each passing minute. But Delano's gun crews maintained their positions, sending streams of tracer fire into the sky to challenge the second wave of attackers inside. The capsizing USS Oklahoma, Seaman James Ward had become part of the desperate rescue effort. As the ship rolled further onto her side, Ward and several other sailors worked to cut through bulkheads and reach trapped shipmates. The sounds of men calling for help echoed through the flooded compartments, muffled by water and twisted metal. Ward used cutting torches and sledgehammers to break through barriers, often working in complete darkness as he followed the voices of trapped sailors. His efforts, along with those of other volunteers, saved dozens of lives during the critical hours following the attack. Lieutenant Commander Logan Ramsey, the duty officer at Ford Island's command center, had immediately grasped the significance of the attack. Even as bombs continued to fall around the headquarters building, he began coordinating the base's response and sending out the radio message that would alert the entire Pacific Fleet. Air raid Pearl Harbor X. This is not drill. His calm, professional demeanor provided a steady foundation for the defensive efforts. As he directed damage control teams and coordinated with other military installations across the Hawaiian Islands, Hospital Corpsman 3rd Class William Schauf found himself at the center of a medical crisis that exceeded anything in his training. The base hospital quickly filled beyond capacity with wounded sailors and soldiers, many suffering from severe burns, shrapnel wounds, and near drowning. Schauf worked tirelessly for hours, moving between patients, administering first aid, and helping to organize the evacuation of the most critically wounded. His medical supplies quickly ran low, forcing him to improvise with whatever materials he could find, including bedsheets for bandages and alcohol from the base commissary for antiseptic. The USS Nevada, moored alone at the harbor's entrance, became a symbol of American resilience when her crew attempted to get underway during the attack. Chief Quartermaster Robert Sedbury took the helm as the battleship began moving toward the harbor mouth, hoping to reach the open sea where she could maneuver and fight more effectively. Japanese pilots, recognizing the threat of an escaping battleship, concentrated their attacks on the Nevada, but her crew fought back with every weapon available, from the main battery guns to small arms. As documented in official Navy records from the National Archives, the second wave of Japanese aircraft arrived at approximately 8:54 in the morning, consisting of 171 aircraft, focused primarily on completing the destruction of the American fleet and eliminating the harbor's repair facilities. Private Joe Rasmussen and his fellow soldiers at Schofield Barracks had organized an impromptu defense of their position. Using weapons from the base armory, they established machine gun nests and rifle positions to challenge the low-flying Japanese fighters. Though their small arms could do little damage to the armored aircraft, their disciplined fire forced the enemy pilots to fly higher and faster, reducing the accuracy of their strafing runs and providing protection for medical personnel treating the wounded. The courage displayed by these men and women during the attack's darkest moments demonstrated the American spirit that would sustain the nation through 4 years of global warfare. They transformed from peacetime sailors and soldiers into warriors in a matter of minutes, proving that heroism often emerges not from grand gestures, but from ordinary people doing extraordinary things when their country needs them most. the USS Arizona, flagship of Battleship Row, became the enduring symbol of both American loss and determination during the Pearl Harbor attack. As the morning progressed, the massive warship fought a losing battle against fire, flood, and the continuing enemy assault. But her crew's heroic actions during those desperate hours would inspire a nation and help forge the resolve needed to win the war that had just begun. Lieutenant Commander Samuel Fuqua, the ship's damage control officer, had miraculously survived the massive explosion that destroyed the Arizona's forward section. Though badly burned and disoriented, he immediately began organizing firefighting efforts and coordinating the evacuation of wounded sailors. The ship's forward magazines had detonated with such force that debris from the Arizona had landed on Ford Island over 500 yards away. Yet Fuqua moved through the smoke and flames with calm efficiency, directing rescue operations even as secondary explosions threatened to tear the ship apart. Seaman First Class Donald Stratton was trapped on the Arizona's forward mast when the magazine explosion occurred. The blast wave had thrown him against the steel structure, breaking several ribs and covering him with burning oil. From his elevated position, he could see the full extent of the devastation. The ship's bow had simply vanished, replaced by a crater that glowed with molten metal. Despite his injuries, Stratton helped to coordinate the ship's anti-aircraft fire, calling out targets to the gunners below while Japanese aircraft continued their deadly work. Chief Petty Officer John Crawford had been in the Arizona's engine room when the attack began. The explosion that destroyed the forward section had sent shock waves throughout the ship, knocking men off their feet and rupturing steam lines. Crawford worked frantically to maintain power to the ship's defensive systems, even as flooding threatened to reach the electrical equipment. His efforts kept the Arizona's remaining gun turrets operational, allowing the crew to continue fighting back against the attackers. Hospital Corpsman Second Class William Lynch found himself treating casualties in conditions that defied description. The ship's medical facilities had been destroyed in the initial explosion, forcing him to set up aid stations on the quarterdeck, where wounded sailors lay in neat rows while oil fires burned around them. Lynch worked without adequate supplies or equipment, using his medical training and improvised materials to treat burns, fractures, and shrapnel wounds. His calm presence provided comfort to dying men who would never see their families again. The Arizona's radio room, though damaged, remained operational thanks to the efforts of radioman First Class Glenn Lane. Lane had been knocked unconscious by the initial explosion, but recovered to find his equipment partially functional. He began transmitting damage reports and coordinating with other ships in the harbor, providing crucial communication links that helped organize the overall defense effort. His radio messages, intercepted by Japanese intelligence, revealed the extent of American determination to continue fighting despite the devastating losses. Captain Franklin Van Valkenburg, the Arizona's commanding officer, was killed instantly when the forward magazine exploded, but his legacy lived on through the training and discipline he had instilled in his crew. The ship's executive officer, Commander Harold Keith, had also perished in the explosion, leaving junior officers to take command during the crisis. Lieutenant Commander Fuqua assumed overall command of the ship, coordinating with Rear Admiral Isaac Kidd, who had been aboard the Arizona when the attack began, and was now missing and presumed dead. According to historical documentation from the USS Arizona Memorial, the ship's crew continued to fight for over an hour after the catastrophic magazine explosion, maintaining defensive fire and conducting rescue operations despite the hopeless situation. Their actions saved dozens of lives and demonstrated the fighting spirit that would characterize American forces throughout the Pacific War. Machinist's mate First Class Joseph George had been working in the Arizona's machine shop when the explosion occurred. Though trapped below decks by wreckage and rising water, he managed to reach a group of sailors who were unconscious from smoke inhalation. George carried each man to safety, making multiple trips through smoke-filled compartments that threatened to collapse at any moment. His actions saved 8 lives before he was finally forced to abandon the lower decks. As the ship settled deeper into the harbor, The Arizona's final moments as a fighting ship came when her remaining ammunition magazines were threatened by the spreading fires. Lieutenant Commander Fuqua made the difficult decision to flood the magazines, preventing another catastrophic explosion that could have destroyed nearby ships. This action effectively ended the Arizona's participation in the battle, but it demonstrated the tactical thinking and sacrifice that characterized the American response to the attack. As the Arizona settled into the harbor mud, her flag still flew from the mainmast, a defiant symbol that would inspire American forces for the remainder of the war. The ship's sacrifice had not been in vain. Her crew's heroic actions had helped save other vessels and had proven that American fighting spirit could not be broken by surprise attack or overwhelming force. By 9 o'clock in the morning, Pearl Harbor had transformed from a scene of complete surprise and devastation into a battleground where American forces fought back with increasing effectiveness. Though the Japanese had achieved tactical surprise and inflicted severe damage, the defenders were beginning to organize coordinated resistance that would prove to the attackers that the American spirit remained unbroken. The USS Nevada, the only battleship to get underway during the attack, became the focal point of both American hope and Japanese attention. Chief Quartermaster Robert Sedbury had managed to maneuver the massive ship away from her berth, but as she approached the harbor entrance, concentrated enemy fire began to take its toll. Japanese dive bombers, recognizing the threat of an escaping battleship, focused their attacks on the Nevada with deadly precision. Lieutenant Commander Francis Thomas, commanding the ship in the absence of her captain, made the difficult decision to beach the Nevada at Hospital Point, rather than risk having her sink in the harbor channel, which would have blocked the entrance. For months. At Hickam Field, the Army Air Corps was mounting its own desperate defense. Second Lieutenant George Welch and Second Lieutenant Kenneth Taylor had managed to reach their P-40 Warhawk fighters despite the ongoing strafing attacks. Both pilots took off under fire, their aircraft barely missing the bomb craters that dotted the runway. Once airborne, they engaged the Japanese fighters with fierce determination, shooting down multiple enemy aircraft and proving that American pilots could match their Japanese counterparts. In aerial combat, when given the opportunity, the destroyer, USS Helm, under the command of Lieutenant Commander Chester Carroll, had been conducting routine patrol duties outside the harbor when the attack began. Carroll immediately ordered his ship to general quarters and began searching for Japanese submarines that intelligence reports suggested might be operating in the area. His vigilance paid off when the Helm encountered a Japanese midget submarine attempting to enter the harbor. The destroyer's guns quickly sank the intruder, marking one of the first American victories of the Pacific War. Aviation machinist's mate John Finn, despite his numerous wounds, continued to man his machine gun position at Ford Island. His sustained fire had already accounted for several enemy aircraft, and his example inspired other sailors to maintain their defensive positions. Despite the overwhelming odds, Finn's determination became legendary among the survivors, who watched in amazement as he continued to fight while blood streamed from more than 20 separate wounds. The USS Shaw, a destroyer that had been in dry dock for routine maintenance, suffered a catastrophic explosion when Japanese bombs hit her forward magazine. The blast was so powerful that it lifted the ship's bow section completely off the dry dock, creating one of the most dramatic images of the attack. Despite the devastating damage, the Shaw's crew continued to fight, using portable fire extinguishers and emergency equipment to prevent the spread of fires that threatened to destroy the entire dry dock facility. Chief Aviation Ordnanceman John Finn and his fellow defenders at Ford Island had established interlocking fields of fire that made it increasingly dangerous for Japanese aircraft to attack at low altitude. The Americans had learned quickly from the initial surprise, and their defensive fire was becoming more accurate and coordinated. Japanese pilots, who had faced minimal opposition during the first wave, now found themselves flying through intense anti-aircraft fire that damaged many of their aircraft and forced them to attack from higher, less accurate altitudes. The USS Maryland, moored inboard of the capsized Oklahoma, had initially been protected from torpedo attack by her sister ship, However, as the attack progressed, Japanese dive bombers began targeting the Maryland with armor-piercing bombs. The ship's crew, led by Captain Delbert Cornelius, fought back with every available weapon, from the main battery guns to machine guns and rifles. Their disciplined fire contributed to the growing wall of steel that American defenders were throwing up against the attackers. Historical records from the Pearl Harbor attack, preserved in the National Archives, indicate that American anti-aircraft fire became increasingly effective as the attack progressed, with several Japanese aircraft confirmed as shot down by defensive fire. During the later stages of the assault, Hospital Corpsman William Schauf had organized a field hospital in the base theater, converting the entertainment facility into a trauma center that could handle the flood of casualties, working with limited supplies and equipment. Schauf and his fellow medical personnel performed miracles of battlefield medicine, saving lives that would have been lost under normal circumstances. Their work continued throughout the attack and for hours afterward, as they struggled to cope with hundreds of wounded men who required immediate attention. The submarine base at Pearl Harbor had also come under attack, but the facility's defenders had managed to maintain their anti-aircraft guns throughout the assault. Chief Petty Officer Michael Rasmussen coordinated the submarine base's defense, directing fire against low-flying Japanese aircraft while organizing damage control efforts for the facilities that had been hit. His leadership helped ensure that the submarine base remained operational, allowing American submarines to continue their patrols and begin the long campaign that would eventually strangle Japanese supply lines across the Pacific. As the second wave of Japanese aircraft began to withdraw, the Americans could take pride in their response to the surprise attack. Though they had suffered severe losses, they had proven that American forces could adapt quickly to changing circumstances and fight back with determination and skill. As the clock approached 10 o'clock in the morning, the sounds of battle began to fade over Pearl Harbor. The second wave of Japanese aircraft was departing, their mission accomplished, but their victory incomplete. The American defenders had demonstrated remarkable resilience, and the harbor that had been caught completely off guard now bristled with defensive fire that made continued attacks increasingly costly for the enemy. Commander Matsuo Fukuda, who had led the first wave of attackers, circled over the harbor to assess the damage his forces had inflicted. Below him, Pearl Harbor appeared to be a scene of complete devastation. 8 battleships had been damaged or destroyed, with 5 sunk or sinking. The USS Arizona burned with such intensity that the smoke column could be seen from 50 miles away. The USS Oklahoma had capsized completely, trapping hundreds of sailors inside her hull. The USS California and USS West Virginia had settled into the harbor mud, their superstructures still visible above the water, but their fighting capacity eliminated. Lieutenant Commander Samuel Fuqua, despite his severe burns and injuries, continued to coordinate rescue operations aboard the Arizona. The ship's quarterdeck had become a makeshift hospital and evacuation point, where survivors gathered before being transferred to small boats that ferried them to safety. Fuqua's calm leadership during the crisis would later earn him the Medal of Honor, but at the moment, he was focused solely on saving as many lives as possible. His actions exemplified the extraordinary heroism that had emerged from the morning's tragedy. The USS Nevada, beached at Hospital Point, had become a symbol of American determination to fight back. Though severely damaged and run aground, the ship's crew continued to man their anti-aircraft guns, providing defensive fire for other ships in the harbor. Chief Quartermaster Robert Sedbury, who had conned the ship during her dramatic escape attempt, remained at his post despite wounds from bomb fragments, helping to coordinate the Nevada's continued participation in the harbor's defense. Aviation. Machinist's mate John Finn finally collapsed at his machine gun position, his body unable to continue despite his indomitable will. Other sailors rushed to his aid, carrying him to the base hospital where doctors counted more than 20 separate wounds on his body. Finn's sustained fire had accounted for multiple enemy aircraft and had inspired dozens of other defenders to maintain their positions despite the overwhelming odds. His actions during the attack would later earn him the Medal of Honor, the first such decoration awarded for actions during the Pacific War. The rescue operations aboard the capsized USS Oklahoma had become a race against time. Seaman James Ward and other volunteers worked frantically to cut through the ship's hull from the outside, following the sounds of trapped sailors who were running out of air in compartments that had become underwater prisons. The work was dangerous and exhausting, but the rescuers refused to give up, saving dozens of lives over the next several days. Ward's dedication to his shipmates exemplified the brotherhood that bound American sailors together, even in the face of death. At the base hospital, Hospital Corpsman William Schauf and his colleagues faced an overwhelming crisis. The facility had been designed to handle routine medical needs, not the massive casualties of a major battle. Working with improvised equipment and limited supplies, the medical staff performed extraordinary feats of battlefield medicine. They saved lives that would have been lost under normal circumstances, demonstrating the same spirit of improvisation and determination that characterized the entire American response to the attack. The final Japanese aircraft departed Pearl Harbor at approximately 10 o'clock in the morning, leaving behind a scene of devastation that would shock the American public and galvanize the nation for war. The attack had lasted less than 2 hours, but its effects would resonate for the remainder of the Second World War and beyond. As documented in official U.S. Navy records, the Pearl Harbor attack resulted in the deaths of 2,403 American servicemen and civilians, with an additional 1,178 wounded. The material losses included 18 ships sunk or severely damaged, and 347 aircraft destroyed or damaged. However, the attack had also revealed the resilience and fighting spirit of the American people. The heroes of Pearl Harbor had proven that surprise attacks could inflict terrible damage, but they could not break the American will to fight. The men and women who had responded to the crisis with such courage and determination had set the standard for the long struggle ahead. Commander Fukuda, assessing the attack's results, recognized that while his forces had achieved tactical success, they had failed to achieve the strategic victory that Japan needed. The American aircraft carriers had been absent from the harbor, the fuel storage facilities had been left largely undamaged, and the naval repair facilities remained operational. Most importantly, the attack had awakened American resolve rather than crushing it. The smoke still rising from the harbor would serve as a constant reminder of the price of unpreparedness, but it would also symbolize the determination of a nation that had been tested by fire and found its strength. The sun set over Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, illuminating a scene that would be forever etched in American memory. The harbor that had awakened to peaceful routine had been transformed into a symbol of both national tragedy and indomitable spirit. As rescue operations continued into the night, the full scope of the day's events began to emerge, revealing not just the extent of the losses, but the extraordinary heroism that had emerged from the chaos. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, upon receiving word of the attack, immediately began preparing for the speech that would ask Congress to declare war on Japan. The date, which will live in infamy, had indeed changed the course of American history, transforming a reluctant nation into a determined participant in the global struggle against fascism. The heroes of Pearl Harbor had provided the inspiration that would sustain America through 4 years of total war. Lieutenant Commander Samuel Fuqua, despite his severe injuries, had remained at his post aboard the Arizona until the last survivor was evacuated. His actions during the attack exemplified the leadership and courage that would characterize American forces throughout the Pacific War. The Medal of Honor he would receive was not just recognition of his individual heroism, but a tribute to all those who had faced the enemy with such remarkable courage. Fuqua's calm leadership during the crisis had saved dozens of lives and demonstrated that American naval officers could respond to any challenge with skill and determination. Aviation machinist's mate John Finn survived his wounds to become one of the most decorated servicemen of the war. His sustained defense of Ford Island, despite being wounded over 20 times, became legendary throughout the Pacific Fleet. Finn's example inspired countless other sailors and Marines who faced similar odds in battles across the Pacific. His determination to continue fighting, regardless of personal cost, embodied the spirit that would carry American forces from the depths of Pearl Harbor to victory in Tokyo Bay. The USS Arizona, though destroyed as a fighting ship, became a symbol of American resolve that would inspire the nation throughout the war. The ship's crew, led by officers like Lieutenant Commander Fuqua, had demonstrated that American fighting spirit could not be broken by surprise attack or overwhelming force. The Arizona's sacrifice would be remembered at every major battle of the Pacific War, from the Coral Sea to the Philippines, as American forces fought to avenge their fallen comrades. Seaman James Ward and the other volunteers who had worked to rescue trapped sailors from the Oklahoma continued their efforts for several days after the attack. Their dedication to saving every possible life demonstrated the bonds of brotherhood that united American servicemen. Ward's actions during the rescue operations exemplified the selfless courage that would characterize American forces throughout the war. From the beaches of Normandy to the jungles of the Pacific, the medical personnel who had responded to the crisis, led by men like Hospital Corpsman William Schauf, had established procedures and techniques that would save thousands of lives during the battles ahead. Their work under impossible conditions had proven that American medical personnel could perform miracles when lives depended on their skill and dedication. The field hospitals they had improvised at Pearl Harbor became models for battlefield medicine that would be used throughout the war. The pilots who had managed to get airborne during the attack, including 2nd Lieutenant George Welch and 2nd Lieutenant Kenneth Taylor, had proven that American aviators could match their Japanese counterparts in aerial combat. Their success in shooting down enemy aircraft despite being caught by surprise inspired the entire Army Air Corps and provided valuable intelligence about Japanese aircraft and tactics that would be used in future battles. According to historical analysis conducted by the Naval War College, the attack on Pearl Harbor, while devastating in its immediate impact, ultimately strengthened American resolve and provided valuable lessons that would be applied throughout the Pacific War. The heroes of December 7th had demonstrated that American forces could adapt quickly to changing circumstances and fight back with determination and skill. The legacy of Pearl Harbor extended far beyond the immediate military consequences. The attack had revealed the character of the American people under extreme stress, demonstrating that ordinary citizens could perform extraordinary acts of heroism when their country needed them most. The sailors, soldiers, and civilians who had responded to the crisis with such courage had set the standard for the long struggle ahead. As the years passed, Pearl Harbor would be remembered not just as a day of infamy, but as the moment when America discovered its true strength. The heroes who had emerged from the smoke and flames of that December morning had proven that the American spirit could not be broken by surprise attack or overwhelming odds. Their courage and sacrifice had purchased something precious beyond measure: the knowledge that when tested by fire, America would not be found wanting. The harbor itself would be rebuilt, the ships would be raised and repaired, and the dead would be honored with appropriate memorials. But the true legacy of Pearl Harbor lay in the hearts of those who had lived through that terrible morning and emerged with their faith in America stronger than ever. They had seen the worst that war could bring, and they had responded with the best that humanity could offer.